Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
we're certainly in the zone.
The Illinois General Assembly has a lot to do before the end of the month. We've got a full rundown.
The U.S. economy roars back, growing more than 6% in the first quarter of the year as mass vaccinations make economic recovery possible.
I've made no secret of the fact that I've been extraordinarily unhappy.
Our Spotlight Politics team on the head of COPA quitting and the mayor's response. That and much more.
What caused the mischaracterization of the Adam Toledo shooting in court by Kim Foxx's office? An internal investigation shed some light.
A new report finds the vast majority of pregnancy-related deaths in Illinois were potentially preventable.
COVID-19 has devastated Illinois' Latino community. Key issues community leaders want elected officials to address.
You could not do this if you didn't have what we have here.
And the secret behind some of the most celebrated honey in Illinois. But first, some of today's top stories. Summer festivals are back, although not entirely as they were before. Mayor Lori Lightfoot chose the Goodman Theater as a backdrop today as she unveiled her plan for summer festivals and cultural events. But those events will not include the Taste of Chicago, at least in its normal form, or the Air and Water Show. The city also announced a music series that would be available only to fully vaccinated Chicagoans, starting with an event at the Silva Room in Hyde Park on May 22nd. And despite some of these changes, Lightfoot says the summer will look and feel entirely different from last year.
Folks, the Open Chicago announcements that we've made to date are only the beginning of our targeted efforts to safely reopen our city. And our ability to make more is contingent upon what we do right now, every day, what you do right now, every day, to fight this virus that is still very much a part of our present.
The head of the agency that investigates police-involved shootings is resigning. Sydney Roberts, who has led the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, or COPA, for the last 3 years, announces that she's stepping down. Roberts says the office has delivered thorough investigations and has made progress in improving police accountability, but Mayor Lightfoot has been critical about the pace of COPA investigations. The shooting deaths of Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez are among the many that the agency is investigating. A former alderman pleads not guilty to charges he used political funds for personal expenses. Former 22nd Ward Alderman Ricardo Munoz entered the plea in federal court today. The feds allege he took money from a political fund to spend on personal items like college costs for a relative, sports tickets, travel, and other purchases. Munoz retired in 2019 after a public domestic dispute. He faces 16 charges in all. And state public health officials report 2,400 new cases of COVID-19 with 30 additional deaths in the last 24 hours. That makes for a statewide total of 1.346 million cases and 22,096 deaths. 96,000 vaccine doses were reported administered yesterday, although the state says that includes 40,000 from pharmacies that didn't report their weekend numbers. So those vaccination rates in general have been trending downward. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. The month of May means it is prime time for action in Springfield. The legislature is set to wrap up its business by the end of the month. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with a look at what is on the General Assembly's plate. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, it is a very full plate. And why? Well, because of what else? The pandemic. A truncated session last year means a lot of issues that would have been dealt with then are instead on this year's plate, if you will. And whatever is going to happen, it has to be done by May 31st. So State Representative Mike Zaleski says it's not quite crunch time, but things are getting busy in Springfield.
There's a lot of meetings taking place, a lot of staff review, a lot of amendments being filed. So we're certainly in the zone.
At the top of the must-happen list, a new roughly $41 billion state budget. And once again, COVID plays a starring role.
Revenues are both down and our expenses have gone up. Yeah, I mean, as a result of any number of issues related to Medicaid or the need to appropriately help those struggling because of the pandemic. And so that coupled with the revenue loss is putting a little strain on the budget. We project right now that the budget committees have to go out and close about a $1.6 billion deficit. not great, but also not insurmountable.
The legislature is looking at closing some tax loopholes or doing away with some tax credits to fill that hole, but making things a whole lot easier. The $7.5 billion that Illinois is going to be getting from the federal government as part of its COVID relief package. But an issue being that Illinois doesn't yet know when that money is going to actually arrive, nor what restrictions are going to come with it, because there will be rules that the state has to follow when it spends that money.
Well, the federal government has indicated that we should have the regulations we need within the next week or two. I think that's plenty of time, frankly, because we've done a lot of work on budget stuff to date. We have a general outline of what it is that we need to spend money on. The question is, how can we use the federal money to really kind of plug in where so that we can craft our needs around it.
Now, another big item, the once-a-decade process of drawing legislative districts. Democrats want that done by the end of session, but Republicans say map-making doesn't actually deserve a spot on that must-happen-by-May list, because that would mean that the state would have to use faulty data to draw those maps, since the federal census information isn't expected until mid-August. All right, now, changing topics. Rewind the clock back to February when Governor J.B. Pritzker gave his joint budget and State of the State address.
It's time to pass ethics legislation this year. Nobody should hold the title of both legislator and lobbyist at the same time.
The governor in February had other items on his agenda, too.
The to-do list is long, but it includes key priorities like finally authorizing the overdue second cannabis licensing lottery and passing an energy bill that protects our nuclear fleet and builds up our wind and solar industries.
So we'll see what happens on ethics there. And now when it comes to what he was talking about with marijuana, it has been a year since a batch of 75 licenses were supposed to have been awarded to so-called social equity applicants to open up more marijuana dispensaries. That still hasn't happened a year later, though there is a bill that aims to get that going. As for energy, Pritzker does have his own plan, but so do clean energy advocates. Unions have their own, and this comes as Exelon is threatening to shut down a pair of nuclear plants if the state doesn't pass a law that would have customers pay to keep them open. But all of this has added complexity because of the ethics scandal surrounding ComEd. Pritzker, meanwhile, dealing with all of this as he's facing a scandal of his own. A recent audit says there was widespread mismanagement at the state's Veteran Affairs Department this fall when 36 veterans died at the state veterans home in LaSalle. Pritzker has thus far blamed his since ousted Veterans Affairs Director, but critics say that the governor needs to apologize and they're calling for hearings.
I think the governor needs to be a little more humble in this situation after the way that he used the last Quincy Home report as a political weapon to his advantage and exploited and took advantage of that at every turn that he possibly could. He needs to be a little more humble and actually take responsibility for this, because right now we see a lot of deflection coming from him.
Beyond that, there are literally hundreds of bills percolating in the Capitol. Some deal with controversial topics like guns and gambling. Others deal with everything from midwifery to a plan that would prohibit schools from banning certain hairdos.
We've seen a lot of instances of Black children across the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and across the country who have been traumatized by outdated school policies that, to put it bluntly, police their hairstyles.
Making things slightly complicated and getting any of this done is that a lot of these hearings are happening virtually because of COVID, which means, as many of us has had to learn this year, you just have to roll with the Zoom punches, like when this mom's child wanted her attention while she was testifying at a legislative hearing. Now, we're going to be seeing a lot more of this. The legislature is in fairly consistently through the end of the month, so look for a lot of changes, progress, if you want to call it that, before the month is out. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And now to Paris for an economic outlook. Paris.
Brannis, the U.S. economy is back somewhat. It grew at more than 6% in the first quarter of 2021 as the combined impact of a mass vaccination rollout and federal stimulus checks triggered a surge in consumer spending. This as President Biden has talked about massive new federal investments and increased tax rates on high-income earners. So how long can this economic boom last? Joining us are Edward Stewart, Professor Emeritus of Economics at Northeastern Illinois University, and Michael Miller, Associate Professor of Economics at DePaul University. Gentlemen, it's great to see you as always. Michael, I'll start with you. U.S. GDP growing at 6.4% on an annualized basis in the first quarter. Does that officially mean the COVID-triggered recession is over?
Well, it took us within 1% of the previous peak, which we hit in March or in February of last year. I think that's close enough to say that we have fully recovered in terms of GDP. This will also give the NBER, who dates the times of the peaks and the troughs, a chance now to set the date for the trough of this pandemic recession, which I think there will be sometime in late summer, early autumn of 2020.
So that's when it appears that the economy would have bottomed out. Ed Stewart,
that's correct.
Let's stipulate that a lot of this is driven by reopenings, by the stimulus package. But when that money runs out, what happens?
Well, the good news is that, and this is one of the things that I don't think a lot of people understand, you see these large numbers of 1.9 trillion, 2 trillion. And most of that money is phased in over a fairly long period of time. So it's not just a one shot. A lot of the stimulus money for education and state and local governments is programmed to last for at least the rest of 2021 and well into 2022. The infrastructure program that's yet to be passed, I think I saw an 8-year time horizon for that. So it's not going to run out anytime soon. And there are also some really interesting numbers in the latest GDP data that came out in Thursday, and then also the personal income numbers that came out Friday, showing how much extra income American consumers have and how much of that they save. So there's a lot of consumer buying power that's still in bank accounts and savings accounts that are there for consumers to spend over a fairly long period of time to come.
A lot of pent-up demand, a lot of positive indicators. Mike Miller, what sectors are doing best right now? What sectors are lagging?
Well, we're seeing the driver of the economy right now is the consumer for several reasons. There is a large amount of pent-up demand for what we call consumer durables, which are things which last more than 3 years. That's cars, appliances, and furniture. And there was a lot of buying of that happening. And then the households have received a fair amount of money from the federal government. The incomes exploded with those $1,400 checks to the large number of households. And they're beginning to spend some of that. Now, a lot of the spending, for example, on leisure and hospitality that was not done during the pandemic, that's gone forever. But people still need the washers and dryers that they weren't buying. So we're seeing that the households are buying. We know that there is a boom in housing. And then if you look at, in terms of GDP, the amount of money spent for non-defense government spending, I think a number I saw was up 44%. Now, that's all that redistribution that occurred, which helped stimulate the households to spend more.
And there could be more of that, as Ed Stewart alluded to. Let's hear what President Biden said about a possible infrastructure plan, and then the American Families Plan, and then a plan to raise taxes on high-income earners to pay for it.
I think it's about time we start giving tax breaks and tax credits to working-class families and middle-class families, instead of just the very wealthy. And here's what the American Families Plan doesn't do. It doesn't add a single penny to our deficit. It's paid for by making sure corporate America and the wealthiest 1% just pay their fair share.
So I know both of your philosophies at this point, you might be divergent on this, but first with you, Ed Stewart, the combination of this kind of spending on infrastructure and other things like community college, childcare, coupled with slightly higher tax rates for high-income earners and corporations, how would that impact the overall economy?
Well, I think, obviously, as you alluded, I think it's going to be very, very positive, because for many, many years, not just the Trump administration, but back 10 or 15 years, the American economy hasn't invested in classical infrastructure, roads, bridges. The American Association of Civil Engineers said we're several $100 billion deficient in spending on what everybody agrees is infrastructure. And as I've pointed out on this show many, many times, in the United States, we have one of the slowest and most expensive internet systems in the world. So we need lots of investment in redundant and higher grade communications technology. The people in Texas will tell you that we need a lot more in terms of power grid and water systems. And then obviously for the new green technologies and electric automobiles, we need a much more rolled out system of charging stations and electrical power.
Well, I want to bring Mike Miller in on this. What about that tax piece, Mike Miller? And these rates, for the most part, wouldn't even match what they were pre-2017. What impact could that slow the economy?
We got to understand that corporate income tax is less than 9% of the total revenue of the federal government. So increasing it is not going to be a major increase in the amount of revenue we get. I think the president has to realize if the American people have decided or will decide in the near future that we would like to be like Scandinavia, a capitalist economy with a large welfare state, the only tax structure that can possibly deal with that is not to tax the rich. There's just not enough money there. There would have to be a much larger base where people in what we would call the middle class pay rates of 40 or 50% of their income to the government, the way it would be true in, say, Ireland and parts of Scandinavia. Now, maybe that's what the American people want, and if so, we can choose so by picking representatives. I'm not a big fan of that myself, but we have to understand there just is not enough money within the rich to pay for all the plans that we have.
Ed Stewart, I think you might disagree with that. Is that how you see it? There's just not enough money there to tax for the super wealthy?
You're an extremely perspicacious man, Paris.
I don't know if I know what that word means, but go ahead.
It's a good word.
Sharp-sighted, yes. Yes, I think there's more than enough. There was a Rand Corporation study just done that through tax cuts and regulatory changes from 1979 until 2020, the United States has transferred something like $37 trillion from the bottom 90% of the population to the top 10% of the population. The incomes of the upper 1% of the country have grown exponentially. The corporate profits are the largest they've been, a share of GDP since the Second World War. Corporate taxes in the U.S. are less than 1% of GDP. In most other countries, not just Scandinavia, they're at least 2%. So there's plenty of room for corporations to pay their fair share or an average share of tax revenues that most industrialized countries pay.
Well, this is
my point would be the progressivity in the United States. It's much more progressive than those other countries where the rich pay a very large percentage of the total pie and the lower incomes pay almost none of the total tax pay.
All right, we're going to have, this is a great debate. We'll continue this at a later date, but we have to leave it there for now. Our thanks to Edward Stewart and Michael Miller for joining us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
My pleasure.
And now back to Brandis with more on Latino Unity Day and issues Latino communities are facing. Brandis.
Paris, Chicago's Latino community has been especially affected by the events of the past year. The coronavirus pandemic has disproportionately impacted Latino residents, and most recently, the community has faced the fatal police shootings of two young people, Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez. Joining us to discuss key issues for Illinois' Latino community are State Senator Celina Villanueva, whose district includes parts of Chicago's Southwest Side, and Sylvia Puente, Executive Director of the Latino Policy Forum. Thanks to both of you for joining us. So first today, we know that it is Latino Unity Day. Sylvia, could you please remind us of what that day is and how it started?
Sure. So it's been going on for about 10 years, but it's basically a day-long event that's put on by a number of Latino-led nonprofits to basically show that we care, are interested in, and want a voice to what's happening in Springfield. We typically bring about 300 or more folks to Springfield to talk to the governor, our legislators, but also basically, as we say, to have a show of Latino unity, that we do have a cohesive Latino community that has an interest in issues of redistricting, education, health, and how our state responds to our Latino community.
And we're going to get to at least a couple of those. Today is also Cinco de Mayo, which we know is a day of remembrance of Mexico's victory over the French during the 1862 Battle of Puebla. Senator Villanueva, remind us of the significance of that day and what it means after what this last year has been.
You know, there's always this misconception that people think that Cinco de Mayo is Mexican Independence Day, which actually is in September. I think this day is really about remembering the struggles, the fight for justice, for freedom, for independence, for people, the people in Mexico. And I think for me, and especially for, you know, folks in this country, it's a day to celebrate our Mexican heritage, which technically some of us do it all the time. But I think especially in light of the pandemic, it's really important for us to take the moment to really think about the impact that the pandemic and other things have really, you know, had on our communities, particularly not just Mexican, but Latino Latinx communities in the state of Illinois.
Yes, and as you mentioned, you know, not enough people know about the true meaning of Cinco de Mayo. Sylvia, you know, throughout the past year, we know COVID has disproportionately impacted the Latino community. Let's take a look. We've got a chart here from the Latino Policy Forum that shows for every 100,000 residents in Illinois, the Latino community saw more than 10,000 cases of COVID. Now that's compared to about 6,400 for white residents, 6,300 for black residents, and 3,800 for Asian residents. Sylvia, is COVID and its impact on the Latino community a key concern this year on Latino Unity Day?
Of course it is. How we address the health and the escalating impact of COVID is tremendous. And just to clarify, Brandis, it's for every 100,000 of that racial ethnic group. So that means that for every 100,000 Latinos, over 10,000 have or have had COVID, which is more than 10% of the Latino community. And with that, we are the lowest tested, right? So we really even feel that 10,000 per every 100,000 is underreported. And as you've noted, that's significantly higher than what it is for any other community in the state. And what we're beginning to see and hear about the impact of long haulers, what we're beginning to see about the impact of COVID on deaths, because we also know that Latinos of working age are have the highest groups of deaths, and what it means for literally what I continue to call an economic, a healthcare, and an education tsunami for the Latino community. So we're working with a coalition called Illinois Unidos, which is an amazing, primarily volunteer-led effort to really come up with policy solutions, but also to put needles in people's arms so that they're getting vaccinated.
Now, aside from COVID's impact, Chicago's Latino community has felt the impact of two fatal police shootings, Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez. The Latino Policy Forum is a part of a coalition, as you've mentioned, that's calling for a moratorium on foot pursuits in the Chicago Police Department. Karina Ayala Bermejo of the Instituto del Progreso Latino spoke about this at a press conference just yesterday.
We are on a course that's headed right to disaster when you have escalated issues on foot pursuits that are an inevitable heated situation with no due process.
Senator Villanueva, your district includes part of Little Village. You're also a resident there. How have these shootings and the videos impacted public safety and policing as an issue for the Latino community?
So I want to say this, Brandis, here's the thing. Issues of violence in Latino Latinx communities on the Southwest Side and Little Village have been in existence. And there have been organizations and community organizers who have been trying to do the interventional work for a very long time. Unfortunately, systemic issues and systemic disinvestment has led to obviously either lack of grant funding or lack of opportunities for us to be able to bring those opportunities to our communities. So the reality is this. The videos were very, very difficult to watch. I got very emotional, and again, it hit me to the core the same way that the videos of Laquan McDonald and so many countless others, have come out and we've had to see on social media. But the reality is this: cycles of poverty, systemic disinvestment in our communities have been long in existence. And so these are major, major, major factors in what's happening and what's going on. And again, like my push and my continuous push as a former immigrant rights organizer, coming from organizing communities and organizing family, and now being a legislator, is this fight to continue to get further investment, whether it's state funding, whether it's different types of funding, whether it's business revitalization, helping undocumented immigrants and immigrants of all kinds being able to access resources like healthcare benefits. The reality is this: our communities are in desperate need of resources, and that's what we need in order to break these cycles of poverty.
More work to be done. That's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to State Senator Selena Villanueva and Sylvia Puente of the Latino Policy Forum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, the secret behind some of the most celebrated honey in Illinois. Stay with us.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
There's much more ahead on the program, including our Spotlight Politics team breaking down the indictments in the ComEd bribery scandal. But first, Illinois is known, of course, for growing corn and soybeans. And there's another local crop some say is ready for its close-up: honey. Chicago Tonight's Quinn Myers has the story of a bee farm just north of Chicago that has become one of the most celebrated in the entire state.
This is just, what, 1-to-1 sugar?
Yeah.
Sugar and water. And we're feeding them because there is no nectar being produced, very little right now. Yeah. Certainly not enough to make honey. And what we're trying to do right now is build these colonies up.
Karen and Jim Belly never expected to become beekeepers. A retired CPS teacher and an architect, they both grew up in Chicago, far away from any sort of agriculture, let alone an apiary. But in the early 1990s, after they bought farmland in Old Mill Creek, Illinois, near the Wisconsin border, the previous owner, who still lived on the property, had an idea.
And she said, why don't you try beekeeping? She said, all the farms years ago all had a couple of hives up here.
A few years later, after they befriended a beekeeper nearby and attended a few workshops, the Bellies decided to give it a shot.
We said we're going down to Hamilton, Illinois to buy equipment, and we're going to give it a try. So
Karen actually looked at me and said, if we don't get into this soon, we're going to be too old to do it.
The Bellies began with 2 hives and slowly expanded. They started entering their honey in local competitions, then the state fair, then national contests, and today have racked up dozens and dozens of awards. And just last year, the couple were named the 2020 Beekeepers of the Year by the Illinois State Beekeepers Association.
It still is a technical hobby, but it's kind of more than that, though, right?
It's a passion now.
But it's now a passion, yeah, I would say that.
The Bellies say their secret is the diversity of local plants and trees, making Northeast Illinois one of the best places to raise honeybees in the entire country.
You could not do this if you didn't have what we have here. And if you would have told me this before we got into beekeeping, that Northeastern Illinois was this magical place for honey, I would have said, you've got to be kidding.
Every year, the Bellies bees feast on lindens, black locusts, clover, wildflowers, fruit trees, and more, creating shades of honey that range from almost translucent to dark brown, colors the couple say would be hard to find anywhere else.
The color is determined by the nectar source, and so you have to have a huge variety of different plants and trees and shrubs and perennials to get the different nectar sources, which will give you the different colors. Here we have a very long growing season actually, and we have a huge amount of variety.
The Bellies maintain around 40 hives at their summer peak, yielding around 1,000 pounds of honey every year. They do it all on their property, also home to an expansive barn they refurbished and a custom farmhouse Jim designed himself. But while their operation and prestige has grown quite a bit since they bought their first hives, the Bellies say what keeps them going is working with the bees themselves, what they call bee time.
See, that wasn't so bad now, was it? There's no clock, there's no day. It's just you and the bees. And you have a bond with them. And you're watching them, and you're watching them come in and out of the hive, and you're looking at the frames, and you're seeing them move around. And you're trying to be, as you found out, as calm and as peaceful as you can. And they're just so busy doing their job, and it's absolutely no sense of time. There's nothing. It's just you and the bees.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Quinn Myers.
Not going to do it, not going to do it, not going to do the bee pun. Or buzz. A lot of buzz growing there. Okay, I did it. And you can learn more about the belly bees on our website. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, an investigation into the mischaracterization of the Adam Toledo shooting in court by Kim Foxx's office is released. Preventable deaths and racial disparities, just two of the findings of a new report on maternal mortality in Illinois. And 4 people charged with conspiring to bribe former Speaker Michael Madigan to benefit ComEd appeared in court today. Our Spotlight Politics tackles that and more. But first, some more of today's top stories. Turnover at the top of the agency that investigates police misconduct cases and police shootings. Sidney Roberts, the head of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, or COPA, resigned today after 3 years on the job. That office has investigated high-profile cases like the shootings of Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez, as well as the unwarranted raid on the home of Anjanette Young. Lightfoot says she did not force Roberts out, but says she has problems with how that agency has operated.
I did not seek her resignation, but I've made no secret of the fact that I've been extraordinarily unhappy with the way that they've handled a number of things, not the least of which is taking over 18 months to move forward on an investigation regarding Anjanette Young. And a lot of that time, nothing happened. That's not acceptable.
Lightfoot also announced new personnel moves today in the mayor's office, including the appointment of Celia Meza as corporation counsel and John O'Malley as deputy mayor for public safety. And state public health officials report 2,400 new confirmed COVID-19 cases with 30 additional deaths. That makes for a statewide total of 1.346 million cases and 22,096 deaths. And so far, 33% of the state's population has been fully vaccinated. A breakdown of communication. That's what an internal investigation by the Cook County State's Attorney's Office found to be responsible for the mischaracterization of the Adam Toledo shooting in a hearing last month. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson joins us now with more. Hey, Matt, remind us what prompted this internal investigation in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office.
So this dates back to a bond hearing last month for Ruben Roman, who was the man who was arrested that night following Adam Toledo's shooting by a Chicago police officer. During this hearing, we sort of got the first glimpse into what exactly led up to that shooting. This was before the body camera video came out, so we hadn't really gotten too many details on this yet. So statements that day made by the prosecutor who was handling this bond hearing made it sound as though Adam Toledo was still holding a gun when he was shot. Again, this was before the video came out, and when that video did come out, it showed that he had dropped the gun just seconds or an instant before he was shot by that Chicago police officer. This examined why those false statements were made, or those misleading statements were made during this hearing.
And what were the conclusions about why those statements were made and just the general reaction from the state's attorney's office?
They said it was a breakdown in communication between different parts of the office in how some information was shared. Between the group that was investigating the Toledo shooting, that segment was known as the Law Enforcement Accountability Division, and the prosecutor was actually speaking in bond court that day, James Murphy. The prosecutor's language that was used in the proffer wasn't reviewed before he went into court, and essentially the state's attorney said that a series of checks and balances sort of failed to catch these sort of things before that hearing went in.
On a smaller level, it reminds me of some of the issues surrounding the Jussie Smollett case. Very quickly, in a few seconds, any fallout following this report?
So James Murphy, the prosecutor who was in bond court that day, he was placed on leave after the video came out, but he's been returned to his initial post. And Jennifer Coleman, Kim Fox's first assistant state's attorney who handles that law enforcement accountability division, she actually resigned her position this morning.
All right, Matt, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And you can read Matt's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
An average of 75 women in Illinois die each year while pregnant or within 1 year of pregnancy. That's according to a new report on maternal morbidity and mortality from the Illinois Department of Public Health. Among the report's most shocking findings, 83% of all pregnancy-related deaths were potentially preventable. And the report also highlighted the impact of systemic racism, finding that black women were about 3 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related condition than white women. Joining us now are the 2 experts who helped put this report together: Shannon Leitner, Deputy Director of the Illinois Department of Public Health's Office of Women's Health and Family Services, and Dr. Robin Jones, Chair of the IDPH's Maternal Mortality Review Committee. Jones is also an obstetrician gynecologist at Rush University Medical Center. Thanks to you both for joining us. Shannon Leitner, let's start with you, please. Before we get into the substance of the report, I want to clarify the distinction between pregnancy-associated deaths and pregnancy-related deaths, because you analyze both in your report. What's that difference, please?
Yeah, pregnancy-associated means the death of a woman who is pregnant or 1 year postpartum from any cause. Pregnancy-related is the death of a woman while pregnant or within 1 year of her pregnancy whose death is directly related to her pregnancy. In other words, we ask, would she have died if she had not been pregnant?
Okay. So among the key findings of the report, 34% of women who died either while pregnant or within a year of pregnancy died from a pregnancy-related cause. Of those women, some 40% had some sort of mental health issue. Black women are 3 times more likely to die than white women of a pregnancy-related issue. And women on Medicaid, rather than private insurance, were 3 times more likely to die within 1 year of pregnancy. Dr. Jones, help us to understand those numbers, please. And what clear disparities do you see there?
Thank you. Well, let me start by saying that Black women are more likely to die from a pregnancy-related medical cause than white women. White women are more likely to die from a mental health cause than Black or Hispanic women. And when you look at the causes of death, the top 4 include mental health disorders, pre-existing chronic medical disease, hemorrhage, and hypertension. But understand that we know that there are other factors that contribute to the death of these women, particularly Black women.
Okay, and I think we're going to come back to some of those as well. Shannon Leitner, the report estimated that 83% of pregnancy-related deaths could have potentially been prevented. Why are we as a society failing those women? Why weren't they prevented?
Well, one thing to just clarify is that when we determine a case to be preventable, we mean that there was some chance that the death could have been avoided if reasonable changes could have been made at the provider, hospital, community systems, or patient levels. And it's important to recognize that among these preventable deaths, the chance of preventing that death could range from a very good chance to slight chance to, it was pretty preventable. So the numbers and types of factors that contribute to each case greatly influence the chance of preventability. Some of these cases, we see societal factors playing a huge role, barriers to care such as childcare, transportation, lack of access to care, and then sometimes we see just poor quality of care. So it really does depend on each situation, each case, and the number of factors that really could have been playing a role in preventability.
A number of factors, then not all of them are necessarily within the healthcare setting.
Correct.
Okay. Dr. Jones, this is the second state report on maternal morbidity and mortality. The first in 2018 found that black women were then 6 times more likely to die of a pregnancy-related condition than white women. The gap has shrunk, but it's you all are saying it's not exactly a sign of progress. Why not?
Well, like I said, we have partnered with the CDC and looking at factors other than or in addition to medical factors. So we're looking at social determinants of health, and we're looking at structural racism. And actually the CDC has led the way in this work, and across the state, they have provided states with the framework to look at factors such as discrimination and interpersonal racism.
And Dr. Jones, you've also talked about the unacceptable disparities that the report has identified and that role of systemic racism. Explain some of the ways that that systemic racism is impacting the health of black and brown women.
We have started over the last year at looking at social determinants of health. And until we have a better understanding of how social determinants of health, poverty, quality education, healthy food, income, how that actually affects a woman's health and her access to needed health care, healthcare doesn't exist in a silo. So we'll have to address those factors and understand those factors and then make recommendations that will address the social determinants of health, because they're definitely impacting what we're seeing in our healthcare system.
Shannon Leitner, how would you compare Illinois to other states on these issues?
I think that Illinois is definitely a leader in trying to understand maternal mortality, understand the drivers of what's leading maternal mortality, and putting our recommendations out there. Our report is held up as an example for other states to look to especially, we were the first state to actually name racism as a cause of maternal mortality. And then this report, as you mentioned, dives into structural racism, highlighting redlining as a contributing factor, as a concrete example of how structural racism contributes to maternal mortality. So I think we are leading the way in trying to identify the causes. In putting our recommendations out there in 2018, we recommended that Medicaid be extended to 1 year postpartum, and that was just accomplished. We became the first state to have Medicaid extended to 1 year postpartum for continuous eligibility, with CMS approving our waiver. So I think we are leading the way, but we have a long way to go because that disparity does need to be addressed.
More work to be done, and something I'm sure we'll continue talking about. Dr. Robin Jones and Shannon Leitner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're back with more right after this. A very busy day in court. That and much more to break down with our Spotlight Politics team, the name of which I almost forgot, you guys. Joining us with more are Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So let's start in court. 4 people who are charged with conspiring to bribe former Speaker of the Illinois House, Michael Madigan, to benefit Commonwealth Edison appeared in court today. Paris, who are these 4? What are the charges?
Well, the thing you have to know about these 4, long story short, is they're former top executives and or lobbyists for ComEd, and the charges revolve around alleged schemes to give jobs and contracts to those very close to Mike Madigan, and a lot of those jobs where you didn't really have to even go to work or do anything, in exchange for Madigan helping push legislation that benefited ComEd, a couple of different bills that benefited ComEd's bottom line, but that caused ratepayers in Chicago to pay more. And clearly here, as some of the court's reporters at the newspapers today indicated, the hearing indicated that there might be more defendants in this case, that there might be more indictments coming down the road. You're looking at a person right now who is mentioned in the indictment but is not charged with any wrongdoing. So the odds makers are wondering if that's who they might be talking about when you hear prosecuting and defense attorneys say they expect more indictments to come.
Well, that's right. And of course, Madigan is clearly the big fish here. Amanda, does this mean prosecutors don't have enough to charge or indict Madigan yet? Is there the expectation that the 4 we just saw will flip on him?
We don't quite know what will go on thus far. They all have been quite loyal. All have pleaded not guilty. And why you don't see Madigan there right now is because he not only has not been charged, but he has vociferously denied any part in wrongdoing. He said if there was a bribe, he certainly did not know about it. What we know from court today is just that there were defense attorneys talked about intimations of a superseding indictment. The U.S. Attorney's Office isn't saying what that means. One would presume that yes, if they had enough to get Madigan, they would certainly have done so. But a superseding indictment, that sure sounds, it doesn't necessarily have to be big. It could be just adding charges to those 4. But yes, it very might well lead to Madigan's feet. And the Tribune also reporting that several former House Democratic legislators, so those who clearly would have known Madigan and how he operates, have either talked to the grand jury or have talked to the U.S. Attorney's Office recently, and that they were asked about Madigan. So it does certainly seem like things are edging closer, though again, the former speaker says he didn't do anything wrong.
Stay tuned. Ex-Alderman Ricardo Munoz, he was also arraigned today. Heather, what happened today, and remind us of what he's charged with?
Well, Alderman Munoz pled not guilty to 16 counts of wire fraud and money laundering, and this dates back to alleged conduct from 2016 to 2019 when Alderman Munoz was both the chairman and the treasurer of the City Council's Progressive Caucus. He is accused of taking more than $38,000 from the caucus's Political Action Committee account and using it to buy all sorts of things, including trips and jewelry and clothes, and to pay a relative's college tuition. That's entirely illegal. You can't use political funds for personal purposes. We have a whole range of Illinois politicians who have gone to jail for doing just that. But Alderman Munoz says he is not guilty, and he is due back in court next month as the trial progresses.
Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson was charged Friday with income tax evasion and lying to investigators, which he denies. He is scheduled to be arraigned on May 13th. Here's what the mayor said today about whether he should step down.
Having been a former federal prosecutor and prosecuted public corruption cases and elected officials, it's very hard for them to maintain their focus on their public life when they're facing such pressure in their private life.
And again, Heather, unlike Alderman Burke, who, toned down since his indictment a couple of years ago, Alderman Thompson still vocal.
He is. He participated in a committee hearing at the very moment that the indictment was unsealed, and he was present, although he did not participate in a hearing yesterday on summer violence and what the city should do to prevent that from happening. He says he is innocent. He says it was an innocent error that he made on his taxes and that he will fight it. And he reminded us all that in this case, what he's charged with does not relate to his official duties as alderman, but the mayor campaigned on rooting out corruption in all forms at City Hall, which was why I was interested to hear her stop just short of calling on Alderman Thompson to resign.
And remember that Thompson's indictment is part of a gigantic investigation into that bank in Bridgeport, Washington Federal, and there are 10 other defendants. They might know stuff about Thompson. He might know stuff about them. So we'll see how this dance goes as that case develops.
Now, additionally, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability's chief administrator resigned today. Here's how the mayor reacted.
I've made no secret of the fact that I've been extraordinarily unhappy with the way that they've handled a number of things, not the least of which is taking over 18 months to move forward on an investigation regarding Anjanette Young. And a lot of that time, nothing happened.
Now, Heather, tell us what we know. Is there the thought that she was pushed out over the Anjanette Young case, feeling the chill on the 5th floor? Go ahead.
Yeah, I asked the mayor exactly that. I asked her point blank, did you request her resignation? And she said that she did not. But the mayor has been highly critical of her agency under her leadership. She was also frustrated last week when COPA called for the officer who shot Anthony Alvarez in Portage Park to be stripped of his police powers. Apparently, they put out that to the press before informing Superintendent Brown, which rankled the mayor. And that could have been just sort of the straw that broke the camel's back at a very already tense relationship between the mayor and the lead agency charged with investigating police misconduct. What this means for the investigation into the shooting of Anthony Alvarez, as well as 13-year-old Adam Toledo, is probably more delays, to be quite frank.
Now, finally, Kim Foxx loses a top lieutenant over one of her prosecutors' misstatements around the Adam Toledo video. Paris, I'm actually going to go to you. You know, the prosecutor's still working there, but, you know, this top lieutenant is leaving. Foxx says that the checks and balances in her office did not work. What could be the political fallout for her with this case?
My guess would be not much, Brandis, because remember the Jussie Smollett case and the mistakes that were made there and confusion over whether she had recused herself or not. She didn't pay a political price for it. She still won re-election pretty handily. So, the views of the state's attorney in Cook County tend to center around ideologically whether or not you support the approach to prosecuting. So, I mean, this is kind of like a similar little hiccup here, maybe a smaller hiccup than Smollett was. But judging by what happened there, I wouldn't see a huge political fallout at this point.
Yeah, and it's just so far out from the next election that by the time, if she is to run again, who knows what we will be talking about at that point. I do think what we have heard thus far about what is going on, I personally did not talk to Foxx myself or have the opportunity to interview her on this, but is not why she had not watched the video of a case that was clearly commanding the public's attention and she knew was going to be a big deal. When this assistant state's attorney made those statements in court on April 10th, she had not yet watched the video. It wasn't until her office became part of the media kerfuffle that she actually watched that really, horrifying video to see.
So some other politics, the hearing on renaming Lakeshore Drive after DuSable, that exploded on Monday. Heather, you reported that the committee meeting was raucous and profane. What happened?
It was. Alderman David Moore has been trying for almost 18 months to rename Outer Lakeshore Drive for Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, Chicago's first non-Indigenous settler. And at that hearing, the city's transportation department came out with new ordinance they said would do that, but he didn't believe them, and he erupted in anger, saying that they had sandbagged him and basically introduced a last-minute change. So at the end of the hearing, which lasted for more than 3 hours, they passed the original proposal, which does not legally define Outer Lakeshore Drive and is opposed by Mayor Lightfoot. So at this point, it's really anyone's guess what happens before the next city council meeting later this month. But something will have to be done to make this change legal, because as we discovered during that hearing, the city's code doesn't define Outer Lakeshore Drive, although everybody who lives here knows exactly where it is.
Aldermen, violence prevention advocates, they also want the city to use federal relief funds to rethink the summer approach. Paris, shootings are already up this year. What are they proposing? Well,
they're proposing a lot more money for violence intervention programs, the mediators that go in as disputes heat up and try to get in there before they turn violent. But, the issue is that there are more people with guns. More people are carrying, more youth are carrying, and everybody I talk to on this issue says the same thing, that there still isn't enough resources for the overarching services that are needed, like mental health, like job training. So the violence prevention is one piece of it, but as we all know, violence has a million different causes. Until those root problems aren't addressed, I'm very skeptical that throwing more money at something like violence prevention can really bring those numbers down for the summer.
Now, before we run out of time, we know that CPS is losing another CEO after years of sort of the back and forth with the Chicago Teachers Union. Janice Jackson is leaving. Heather, Dr. Jackson's 2 top administrators are also leaving, and we've heard some other announcements of folks leaving and appointments in recent months. Is this a brain drain for the mayor?
It's not a normal amount of turmoil. And I asked the mayor about that today. I said, is this an indication that there are significant problems at your city hall? And she said, look, it's been a difficult year for everybody. Everybody's taking stock of their lives and what they want from their lives and maybe making decisions to change. However, the mayor will have to fill several high-profile positions just in the coming weeks. Today, we did get an announcement that Celia Meza will become the city's corporation counsel. If she's confirmed by the city council, she would be the first Latina to hold that post. Another indication that diversity is very important to Mayor Lightfoot.
Okay, and lots more positions to watch as she fills them up. Thanks to the Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. And you can find more on the stories discussed tonight with our Spotlight Politics team on our website. And while you're there, make sure to read a story about a recent catch and release of a 240-pound sturgeon. I once caught a fish this big. It's all at WTTW.com/news. And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
Talk about reeling in the big fish there. You know, there's a theme here. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A first-of-its-kind reparations program, Evanston, is the next stop on our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series.
And a look inside an old building for insight into Chicago's Norwegian past in an all-new Ask Jeffrey. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.